Well, I'm excited for this conversation with Katie Quesada because Katie and I met at this event in Coeur d'Alene. Our friend Tyler Dickerhoof was doing a leadership event, and I knew from all the other speakers at the event that she was going to be talking about storytelling, and I was looking all her stuff up on Instagram, and I instantly knew this is the workshop that I need to sit in and learn from because storytelling is something that I know is incredibly important. I am loosely aware of my own, like, I would grade myself maybe a B as a storyteller if I'm being generous, and I want to improve, but I know it's powerful. And her presentation was the funniest, most practical thing I've heard in a long time. So everyone was laughing, everyone was having a great time, and we walked away with like copious notes of practical stuff to do. Katie, you're an incredible speaker. For one, I want to honor you in that. Like, you're really good at what you do in like the actual keynote space. But I know you work with massive brands like American Eagles and SpaceX and Nike and more. Like, you help brands tell their stories. You help individuals tell their stories. You have incredible frameworks with it. And it's super cool what you do. So that's why I selfishly wanted to bring you on my show to help my people and myself tell better stories so we can grow our brands, grow our businesses, and have more impact. So all that to say, thank you for hanging out with me today.
Thanks, Graham. Your session was also great. So let me just say that out loud. And I loved the Rebel keynote, and I hope other people get to hear it too, because you're very good at what you do. I would not give you a B. So that's the good news.
Oh, okay. That's incredible. That's awesome. Well, this was great. Thanks for coming. We can go now.
Have a good day.
I had a great time. I feel filled up.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I know you shared this, your story is incredible. It's hilarious. It's crazy and fun. But maybe just give us some context for like, how did you become a storytelling coach? How does one become a storytelling coach? And how would you describe what you do to people?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a job I made up. And thankfully now it works. So once it works, you can say you are it, but in the beginning it's a little rocky. But yeah, my husband and I, now 6 years ago, we had a 2-year-old daughter at the time. And my job was kind of falling apart, my full-time role. I'd been in the nonprofit space for all of my 20s. And I thought that was what I was going to do forever. I loved the work I did. I was very fulfilled by it. But internally, the leadership was heading south, and we were like, oh no. And I was experiencing some significant burnout. We had had a year of infertility, and it was just one of those years where in your marriage, you're like, is this it? Is this the plan? Like, this is what we're doing now? But you've never known anything else, like a lot of what you talk about in your work. Like, you just kind of are like, I'm on a path, I'm on a track. All I know is the next right thing. I majored in this thing. What else could I ever do? Yeah. And you have those kinds of big conversations. And meanwhile, my husband and I had bought a junky 1990s RV with a group of friends off Craigslist for like a total cost, all in of like $5,000. And everyone pitched in, their big budget of like $1,100. It's all the money we had. None of us had any money. This was our big spend. And then we renovated it and took it on a couple trips. We like ripped out the carpet. It was a bunkhouse. It was a lovely Jamboree Searcher 1990. And we came back from one of those trips, and my husband said, do you think we could live in an RV? And I was like, that's all I said. And then we just kind of had joked about it. And then I started to, I'll never know to this day if it's like the algorithm, God, fate, or just the internet. But I started to see all these families who live in RVs full time. And I was like, oh my gosh. And this is pre-pandemic, right? So that kind of became a thing more and more and more in the pandemic.
That was trendy later, but you were ahead of the trend.
Exactly. I was like, oh wow, there are humans and they live in RVs, families, to save money or to travel and like live this adventure. And I was like, this is kind of the out that maybe we need to like break from the code, to like that glitch in the matrix. I think you said that in your keynote, like that. What is this going to look like? And so we started to kind of joke about it, and we started following this family that lived in this beautiful RV. And then I decided to officially quit my job, which was a really huge deal for me and my family. And I walked in to announce to the team that I oversaw that I was quitting. And I stood outside the door, and I went on Instagram as a coping mechanism. Surely, I'm like just scrolling to try to avoid the pain of the reality of my life. And I opened Instagram, and that one woman went live and said, we're selling our RV. DM me if you want it. And so I DM'd her and I said, we want it. And then I went in and I quit my job. And then I called my husband afterwards and said, hey, you have a long commute home. I DM'd this lady who has this fancy RV. You want to think about that on the way home, that maybe we should live in it? My husband was like, oh God, and he drove home, and we got this insane email. And the email said, you have 30 minutes. If it gets to you on the list and you're number 16, you'll have 30 minutes to decide if you get it or not, if you want it or not. And you have to put down a cash deposit tonight, and you have to follow all these stipulations, because it was the internet, there's no rules, right? People are just they're just saying
making
words.
It up.
Yeah. And people are saying yes to those words. And so it came to us, and we had 30 minutes to decide. And yeah, my husband and I were like, what are we going to do? And it's a much longer, wilder story, which you heard. But yeah, we decided to do it and we sold everything we owned. And a tiny part of that job I was quitting was that had been keynote speaking for years and speaking in these spaces. But I had started to sit across from a panel of people, usually a really diverse panel, like someone in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, a young Black girl, an older Indian woman, like a really diverse panel of people. They would tell me their life story, which on average for people takes anywhere from 90 minutes to 3 hours, somewhere in there. And then I would help them say it in 6 minutes or less from a stage. Wow. So that had been a tiny part of our events. And so I had really loved doing this. It wasn't even on my job description. No one was even asking me to do this. I went real rogue on this thing, but it was working. And the audience was captivated by the people in the stands standing up and sharing their story. Way more than me, way more than people we were flying in. Like it was so quickly present that like, oh, this is the thing that sticks. Human, vulnerable, authentic storytelling. So I had done that now many, many, many times before I quit. And then we moved into the RV, we sold everything. 3 weeks later, I got pregnant with my second daughter. And I launched a story coaching business. And I started working with individuals and then teams and then clients and then larger clients. And now 5 years later, here we are. I live in a normal house and I do this.
Oh, it's incredible. There's so much there. I mean, first of all, you're a total rebel. So like to borrow my own, like put you into my world, like you are a rebel for a couple reasons. One, like no one does what you did. That's so different. And you went out of the norm to like the RV thing in general that you toyed with, and then buying the RV and selling everything, quitting your job. People are just too afraid to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But being a rebel is really about pursuing dreams and desires. And I love what you said, like the listening to people's stories from 3 hours to 90 minutes and turning them into 6 minute versions for them. Like no one was asking you to do that, but you were drawn to it. And look at what you've done. You've turned that random desire into an incredible business, but it's also helping so many other business owners. So you're having all these multiplicative effects. So I just love all that about your story. And there's so much to the specifics of it. I also love like the timing of it when you just took some action to move into this, or to buy and move into the RV. Then you finally get pregnant. Infertility ends.
Yes.
It launches a new business. Like I think there's something to taking the big crazy first step, like opens the watershed for so many other steps in our lives, right?
Yeah. And you shared this in your keynote too, but I think for all of us that when one of my friends said it really beautifully, like a year after we lived in the RV, and mind you, we're living a normal life in an RV. Like we're having Thanksgiving dinner, like friends are coming over, like we have children. It's just, and it's parked in our friend's backyard. So it's not like, we're living our normal life. And one of my friends came over and said like, oh, I think you're the first person that I ever knew who colored outside the lines.
Wow.
And like, I think that's such a rebel statement, and that I think, and then they made weird moves. It's like the rebel idea that you have is also contagious. Like that when we have permission, we give permission. When we give permission, we grant permission. Like that whole, like when you see those stories play out, which is why people have to tell those stories, right? Like you have to share those stories and it doesn't always work. You shared that really well too. Like there are seasons too where I was like, oh no, do I need to get a 9 to 5? We've all had those moments, but there is something contagious about how we share those stories. Those rebel stories is really valuable.
Oh, so good. Yeah. Oh man, that's a mental note for myself. It's a great connection there too with what you do and what I'm trying to do here. So like, let me ask you this, because I'm just curious, because I don't know if I got this part from even our time together in Coeur d'Alene, was when you started the business, because I love the idea of, obviously starting businesses, I'm helping people start businesses. And there's that weird, like toddler, adolescent, like stage of the business where you know what you want to help people with, and you have a little bit of confidence that you can help them with it, but it hasn't been validated from the market enough. Or even if you're getting paid, you're still trying to figure out, like you kind of said, who is the real avatar here? Who's the best person for my service or my skill or knowledge? Can you maybe just give us a couple of details there of how did you like grope around in the dark and go from individuals to brands, and then to the type of brands you're doing now? I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. In the toddler infant stage is exactly how I would say that. Like in the very beginning, I was, just saying things like, I'm a storytelling coach, and people were like, huh, that was like cute. More, that was sweet. I wonder, do you write children's books? I'm like, no, what, like, and so for me, it started with, first of all, organic network. So I had been in the faith-based space for all of my 20s, and I had been on teaching teams, and I had just known a very large network of pastors. So I started to share that I do individual speaking coaching and storytelling coaching, because obviously very talented pastors tell very good stories, period. Or very good speakers. They tell, I don't want to interchange the word pastor and speaker. Those are two different things. But I think that there is that is a skill set to hold a room for a long time. And I had been in a really unique situation where I had been trained up by some very talented speakers who gave me very good feedback. And I had found that the feedback loop is what most people were missing. Is just no one's telling them how to do a better job. And there's a really cool, like Adam Grant has a great analogy that, especially in the speaking space or storytelling space, people almost only have critics or cheerleaders. But the middle thing is a coach. And a coach is how you get better. Right? For someone to say to you, hey, here's how to tweak that story. Hey, here's how to make that thing more effective. Hey, here's how to do that. Because we're so not used to receiving that kind of feedback. So I started with individuals, truly people I knew from my organic network. I told the world, I do this now. That's step one, as you know, the scary, I do this now. And then I started charging people like $50 an hour. And someone was like, huh? And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I never made money in my life either, Graham. You know what I mean? I had only ever worked in the nonprofit world. I used to have big meetings once a year to make $500 more. You know what I mean? I had never made money. So money and that was a big part of my own business for me became actually very healing, from my own trauma of leaving that organization and the leadership and pain and all those pieces. When you can help someone and you can do well in business, you can also make money.
Yes.
That was a very cool cycle for me to get in and be like, oh, this is great. Because there's a lot of spaces, especially in the nonprofit space, where the only goal is work until you die. Good luck with money. And to come out of that was really healing for me. So I took on individuals, and then a couple people I knew who worked at brands said, could you do a quick communication? 1 hour session. So I did a couple of virtual sessions because I knew some people who worked not at high level brands, but at dentists of Monrovia. I don't know, just the most random group of people you can think of. And then I did that a couple times, and every time I just kind of tweaked my content. And then after about a year, I had done enough workshops that I was like, oh wait, I need to hire a designer and create a deck and build a workbook. Then I did those things, and then I started to talk about it more effectively online. And then I had a really great dear friend who reminds me a little bit of you. His name's Grayson. I told him something about how much I was charging, and he was like, oh, Katie, that's not good. And I was like, what? And I had gotten up to $150 an hour or something. And I was like, you guys, I'm making therapist money. Do you know what I mean? And he was like, oh, Katie, in the business space, if you don't double that tomorrow, you are literally losing clients, just baseline.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and so I worked up all the courage and felt queasy and had to make a document that said numbers on it, and send it to someone. And then they never called me back. And then I thought, I'm never going to do this again. And the next person said, of course. And the next person said, of course. And then the fourth person never emailed me back. And then the next person said, of course. And then I very slowly started to raise those prices and then get into more keynote spaces. And then, then you slowly realize, oh, wow, people are making significant funds from doing good work. And then it kind of, that's a very flash 5-year journey, but it really is the one, the few, the many, the price range. And then for me, really thankfully, my entire business has grown from referrals. So 5 years later, I've never ran an ad, which I think there's nothing wrong with that. There might be time for me to run an ad for sure. I am open to whatever the next phase is. I have nothing against any of those things, but I do think that when you serve a team, that team tells another team. And when you serve a company, that team tells that friend, and then that friend tells that friend, and then that person follows you on Instagram. And then when you post just some regular content, I am not an Instagram guru. You just kind of, it thankfully worked that way for me. I recognize it doesn't for some really talented people, but it was a lot of organic referrals and very slowly raising my prices through fear and nausea.
Yeah. Yeah, man, there you go. That's how you start a business, fear and nausea, and just you just do it. I love it so much. To me, and I'm going to get into the storytelling. So I know everyone's like, oh, let's get to that. But just I think this is very instructive because your business journey is really very, very common, right? It's a giant iterative process.
Absolutely.
I would love for it to be this, okay, here's my website, here are my offers. I know these are the right prices, air quotes, whatever that means. And now I show up with the world look, everyone, I am this storyteller coach, and this is what I charge, this is what I do. And here's some testimonials I already got from in secret without anybody knowing because I made them up. But it doesn't work that way. You just start, but you need to talk about feedback loop for speakers. Business owners need a feedback loop. And you needed that feedback loop of, okay, they said yes to that price. They said no, but they said yes. Oh, and then I love how you said you changed your content just slightly for about a year until you realize, okay, I think I've got this down. Now, how can we make the wrapper prettier? How can we make, the user experience a little bit better?
Yeah.
And then just the sweetness of your friend Grayson to say, oh my gosh, not only could you charge more, that's not what he's saying. Is like, you're losing clients because they think you're not good enough because your prices are so low.
Yes.
And I have so many like clients and customers that don't understand that concept. Like, what do you mean I'm being turned away because I'm too cheap?
Yes.
Because they haven't dealt with that type of clientele, but that's a real thing. So I just love the reality of your story there.
You said it back to me in better business terms, so that's great. That was iteration clear. I'm like, yes, that all of those things that's what happened in retrospect.
So let's dive into this the what you do, because it's so helpful and powerful, and like selfishly I want to noodle on your content even more. My life has been a little crazy since that event with my book launch in sort of present moment.
Yeah.
And so like I haven't had time to like come up for air, but I was literally looking through my phone. I got a bunch of like notes from your workshop that were super, super helpful because we literally workshop stuff in real life. But top of like the topic here, like just big picture. Yeah. How would you say, in your words, how can storytelling or improving your storytelling, if you're already doing it, help us as a business owner or a content creator? Absolutely.
I'll start with the basic awareness that storytelling is way too meta. So like, what does this lady work at Disney? Like, what are we talking about here? So I want to just clarify really quickly. The work that I do is human, interpersonal, social storytelling. So I do the stories you tell on video, the stories you tell to your friends, the story you tell on Instagram, the story you're telling to your spouse, the story you're telling when someone says, what do you do for work? Those kinds of storytelling. I am not creating documentary style films. I am not a graphic designer. I actually have no marketing degrees. I am helping people say something so that someone else will care about it. So that is my micro niche in storytelling, which is important to begin with, because the word storytelling is like, leadership, hope. You're like, what does this lady do? So that's that very specific kind of lens there. And that type of storytelling, my personal bent into it is that it has to be concise and compelling, because we know that it works. The science behind storytelling is amazing. I mean, we could do a 14-part series on the science behind storytelling, but we know that when our brains hear stories, that it changes the chemicals that our brain produces. It makes us align with the people around us. It gives us empathy. You are 60% more likely to remember something if it is wrapped in a story. So if you are a data-driven person, if you are super factsy, like if you love numbers, that's great. But the question I just want to ask back to you is, do you want someone to remember the numbers? If the answer is no, then that's fine. Leave it on a slide with 14, 91, 38, 74. B, yellow. You know what I mean? Like, great. That's what your slide deck says. Zero people will remember that, including you. You're not going to remember that in a week. But if we wrap that in a story that's meaningful and someone feels something, all of a sudden the neural pathways in their brain literally make them remember it. So if you want to be memorable, you have to become a better storyteller. And we all want to be memorable because we need to create human connection, sell brands, businesses. We want our spouse to care about our day. I mean, this is all baseline things here.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I mean, that's why I teed you up for that. Like, that stat is insane. 60%, people are 60% more likely to remember something if it's wrapped in a story. Yeah. So I learned this the hard way when I realized that for the first probably 4 or 5 years of my business, and I was teaching musicians how to record music. Like, that's my first brand. Yeah. I was like, just give them the facts. They want to know, what microphone do I use? How do I use this tool to make my vocals sound better? What knob do I turn? They just want the how-to. And I was like, I'm not going to be one of those fluffy content creators that talks and tells stories. I'm going to get right to the meat. So my YouTube videos were all that, just meat. Any webinar I did to launch a product or to connect with another person's audience, or any interview I did on a podcast, just the meat. I'm going to give them so much content. I'm going to shove content down their throat. And I never told stories. I never even thought about stories. Yeah. And definitely not my life stories. Like, I would never talk about myself, because I kind of grew up in that same sort of faith-based world where it was like, don't talk about yourself. It's all about other people. Like the book of Philippians, like, look out for other people's interest above your own. So I was like, who cares about Graham? They just care about what they came here to do. And it took me years to realize that I was missing out on so much in terms of like helping my people retain the content or have an emotional connection to the content. They don't just go, oh, that was great, and then they forget it and walk away.
Yes. Yeah,
So
and people
talk to
want
that.
to people want to buy, people want to connect, people want to learn from a human
Yep.
person. Do you know what I mean? And what I think you're gifted in, Graham, which is good news, is that you do also understand that you need to have something very quickly that is very practical, that is very intentional. Because what we don't want is we have Pixar, for the other thing. Like, tell me a really long story and like make me feel things. That's amazing. But the balance middle space, which is what you're speaking to, is like you did the first thing first. You figured out content, points, tips. Like, I'm going to get right into it, those kinds of things, which are actually very valuable because some people tell way too long of stories and we're bored and we're like, you're 2Xing every video you watch. You're like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I'm asking for one tip. So there's space for both of those things. But the truth is, in the world we're living in, you can get the information you need from Google, period. But we desire to learn information from people. We desire to know people. And that's how it sticks in our brain, right? Like, that's why you're successful at what you do. That's why we're in a world where there's a lot of people teaching the same information, but we're drawn to one of them because that person shares our story, that person shares our point of view, that person has something about them we love. And those tiny little pieces of information build a much more powerful story, which in turn then someone remembers your thing more effectively because they think of you, right? Like, it goes in a whole other category. So I think that is a really big part of it, is how you balance those two things is really important.
So good. Love the distinction there. So yeah. So when I think about stories, and I want to get into it right now, is for those listening, if you have a business, if you have a content platform, like, you're probably giving webinars or presentations, you're probably doing videos where you have to like teach something, but it's a little dry, or to your point, like, you want to stand out and not be the same because everyone's got the same information.
Yeah.
Like, this is a way to take what you're doing to the next level and have a deeper connection, have people remember you. So there's two things that I learned a lot from your workshop. One of them was micro storytelling versus macro storytelling. Can you explain those two things? Because that was so instructive for me. I was thinking about how I'm already doing that, but didn't have language to put towards it.
Yeah. So micro stories are stories that we tell all the time that are events. We are very accustomed as humans to just share events. We say, like, I sold everything I owned and became a minimalist and moved into an RV. End of story. We share an event. And that's a micro story because it's small, right? A macro story, which needs to be broader and have more connection. A macro story is when you can finally take an event and give it value. Jess Ekstrom says you move from moments to meaning. That we actually have to take our moments and give them meaning, meat, purpose, connection, because then anyone can come through our story door, right? So what we end up accidentally doing is isolating our audience by creating an event where, oh yeah, Graham, me and you only have anything in common if you desire to live in less than 200 square feet for 2 years. And you're like, no, right. I do not desire that, right? But if I were to share something that has value instead of the event, which is like, in that season, I learned that stories are way more valuable than stuff. You can say, oh, I've learned that, or I desire to learn that. That's a value that I understand. Now you can come into my story. So we really want to get people to move from event-based sharing to value-based sharing through things like inclusions, which is the 3 C's we talked about. Like, that you actually learn, when you learn something, you can actually open the doors way wider. When you become an expert at something bigger than a task, but more of a value, that can really broaden your horizon. And then way more people can come through your story doors. You'll have way more people who have connection with you, even though they don't have the same experience, which is always true, right? We learn from people who have totally different experiences than us. Like, we're watching Olympic athletes. I have nothing in common with an Olympic athlete. Yeah. Like, oh my gosh, that's, I feel connected to them somehow. Somehow I'm thinking about myself. Why is that? Because the stories that were told were value-based, not event-based.
That's such a powerful distinction. And I think that's one of the things that helped me better feel at peace with telling my story.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, hey, this is my story. It's something that I went through or happened to me, but what value can I ascribe to it so that that's the connection point? I love how it's like like you said, a doorway into our world. And so I have even since then felt more comfortable sharing my story, knowing here's what I've learned, here's the takeaway. And they go, oh, okay, so now I'm connecting with your story because that's the value is the part that we share. And you went through a really cool exercise in the room of giving us a bunch of values, like a value bank we could pull from, and how can we attach those to our stories? So I think because I've seen, and when I started to learn speaking, I remember hearing, like, you got to have stories, you got to open and close with a story. And I remember seeing somebody do what I was afraid of, because I remember thinking, well, do you just pick a random story to open your keynote with? Does it not matter as long as you have a story?
Right.
And I saw someone do an event where the content was amazing, but the opening story was so random. And it was about like the new car that he bought, and then his wife didn't like the car, and like And it's funny. It's really funny. And I kept waiting for the connection
For
to
sure.
what they're about to talk about or what the point was. And there was none. It was just, I realized after the fact, this was just to lighten up the room,
Yep.
get us to get comfortable. And that was powerful and helpful, I guess, but had literally nothing to do with anything. And I was like, well, that's the kind of storytelling I don't personally connect with. I'm like, what was
Right.
like, you just wasted our time. Like,
Right.
So anyway, I love how you're showing like you could
Yes.
tell a random story about buying a car that your wife didn't like if there was a way to attach macro a value to it that relates to what you're about to teach, right?
Right. And so much of that has to do with so yes, there are stories for entertainment purposes alone, right? Needless to say, like a funny joke, an allegory, you know, people who open keynotes or meetings with like, there once was a rabbit, you know, I'm like, what are we talking about with a rabbit? You know, like what's going on here? That, you know, people, there's a time and a place and a space for that type of storytelling, but in those kinds of moments and in any, you know, if you have a business that serves people or you are a speaker or you have courses, whatever that looks like for you in your own business, the goal of your storytelling is that someone else thinks about themselves. That's the goal. The goal, really good storytellers, believe it or not, you're captivated by them and you think you're thinking about them. But really what you're thinking is like, oh, my dad. Oh yeah. Wow. Me too. Really good storytellers make you think about yourself. And that's where you get into values, because when you get into values, you get deeper and deeper and deeper. So you exactly hit it. Like, yes, there's a time and a place for silly random stories, but that's not it. Because what you want to do is really honor someone's time by making it entirely about them through your story, which is kind of what we were talking about a second ago. You know, like it might feel selfish at first to be like, oh, this is how I got here. But when you begin to realize, oh, wait, I mean, I get to say all the time in the work I do, like if you choose not to share your story, and especially the parts of it that are ugly, painful, hurtful, or feel embarrassing, if you choose not to tell those parts of your story, then you are choosing to leave out someone else's survival guide. Someone literally needs you to tell the hard parts of your story so that they can get through the one they're living. So, we love stories that are like, you know, Graham, you could have said like, oh yeah, I always wanted to just do this one thing and I did it. Ta-da! You know, but that's not the story, you know? The story is really what you went through and grew and how you, walked through all of that. So I think that's a big part of it.
Well, to that point, let's talk about the 3 C's of storytelling. This was a great point because I think there's a lot of people that when you showed like you probably do one of these 3 C's well and you probably suck at one of these 3 C's. It made storytelling so simple for me. So maybe walk us through what the 3 C's are and where do you see the mistakes people tend to make in those?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways you can kind of structure storytelling. There's a lot of books. There's a book called Story that has like 12,000 pages and there's a million Pixar rules, whatever. But I have to make everything simple because I'm tired and I'm a mom of young children. And so the 3 C's is the easiest, simplest, most practical way I could kind of figure out how to articulate something as nebulous as storytelling. And any single story in the entire world has these 3 C's, and they are context, conflict, and conclusion. And a very good story is required to have those 3 C's. You cannot tell a great story without knowing who, what, and where, what almost went wrong, what they wanted, what happened, the inciting incident, what didn't. And then conclusion, which is like, then I learned, then I saw, I add a value, I tell you why I told you this story, right? That's what that guy was probably missing most was that conclusive piece in his keynote, right? So and every single one of us has a weak C and a strong C. And I do this in my workshops, I do this in my course. But identifying which C you're bad at is really helpful because when you can start to get better at that one, your stories will become more captivating and people will pay attention longer when you're talking, right? So some people have way too long of context, and they literally talk like, oh yeah, in 2021, I think it was May, and I was, do you remember you were living in that house, the other house? Okay, and I was walking with you and we were going to the beach and you're like, what are you talking about, right? Like, where are you headed here? And it's just way too many details. Like we just need to get flash detailed information. I get to say all the time, like, you almost never need to say the year again. Just stop saying the year. Just stop. Like, unless it's like 2011. I mean, September 2001. That's a story, right? March 2020. That's a story, right? Those are important years. But for the most part, please just start saying a couple years ago, a while ago, when I was. This is how you open stories, right? When you say like, in 1997, all of a sudden we all have to do math, right? We're like, was that 10 years ago? Was it 20 years ago? Like, how old is she? How old am I? Where were we? Where's my child born? Where did I live at the time? And you're just distracting people. So like context, some people give way too much context and detail. Those people tend to often be data-driven or talented writers. Talented writers tend to say so much context up front because they're used to doing it in writing. But in social storytelling, it doesn't work as well, right? And then conflict. Conflict is where you actually get to the good part of the story. You get to tell the whole truth. You get to engage with people in a way that's honest and raw and real. You get to say things like, and honestly, I was worried we weren't going to stay married. And honestly, I was afraid that my kid was going to turn out crazy. And honestly, I, at the time, thought someone's going to find out I'm not good at my job. You get to say these things that are true and honest and real, and you get to say someone else's internal dialogue on the outside, say the weird thing. Like you actually get to start to bring that to the surface and tell the whole truth. And people who are really bad at conflict are usually people pleasers. People pleasers tend to tell stories like, oh yeah, it was so crazy and I am doing fine. And you're like, what happened? I don't know what happened, right? Or, and a lot of this can be spiritually really confusing. A lot of spiritual practices, they tend to tell stories like, everything is hard, God is fine, amen. And you're like, wait, huh? Like, I don't even know what that means, right? Like, whereas like things like scripture or ancient texts are gnarly, right? Like, it's like very clear that someone is like, God, I never want to know you again. Leave me forever and kill everyone. Amen. You know what I mean? Like that's a better story, right? Because it's more engaging, it's more creative, it's more connected. Like, and that's why these like ancient texts in all different religions last. That's why we're still telling these stories, right? Like, because they matter to us, they give us value, they restory us, which is something I talk about in our in my workshop. But so that's conflict. You really got to tell the whole truth. You got to start telling the whole truth. It's really valuable. And then conclusion is where leaders are born. It's where keynote speakers are born. It's where people who want to have their stories make impact start to sound like they do. And conclusive storytelling is when you say things like, because of this I learned, now we see, now we get to, we no longer have to because of, right? These really big conclusive statements. When you look at like leaders of amazing organizations, right? Every one of their talks, keynotes, meetings ends with like, that this used to, but now, so we can, and you get to because, right? They have this like great story arc of like motivation. And all of that is because of conclusive storytelling. So those are the 3 C's: context, conflict, and conclusion. All of us got a strong C and a weak C. And once we can kind of unpack that, it helps.
Yeah, that's so helpful and so instructive. It makes it simple, but it also allows us to think about, where is my weak C? It's funny. I think what I wrote down in your workshop is that my weak C, I thought at the time, was conflict, the middle one. Partially because I'm a people pleaser, partially because it's taken me a long time to realize that the conflict in my life matters to other people.
Yeah, good.
And so what's interesting is, as I've been sharing more of my story over the years, and especially in this book, Rebel, because like this book feels very tender to me. Like, good. This is the raw, real, this is my disappointments are on full display in this book. And I got an opportunity just a couple weeks ago, another John Maxwell thing, because John was speaking at our event that we were at, but I got in a small room, I got to share the keynote, like a 10-minute keynote of Rebel, 10 minutes. And so I was like, I shared my dream dying, my dream of being a rock star. And I felt in that morning when I was going to share it, I need to share every bit of pain, like all the details of the pain. And it felt so awkward. Like, just full disclosure, when I was done, I was like, this is weird. Like, I don't know if anybody connected with this.
Yes.
And when it was over, they said, anybody have any takeaways from the whole event the last 24 hours? 4 people stood up, and their biggest takeaway from the whole event was my 10 minutes I had just given, because they didn't say, oh, I loved your story, Graham, it's so powerful. They said, I too had a dream die.
Right.
And it made me think of my dream that died 10 years ago.
Yes.
And I feel like I can bring it back now. And it was all about them, but it was my pain.
Right.
And they connected with it.
Right. And I mean, some of that's connected to like, which I've talked about in the workshop, but the first rule of Pixar storytelling is that we want to watch characters try more than we want to watch them succeed. So we are, as humans, innately, we are designed to desire to watch people try. We like that narrative even more than we like Graham's bio that is read before he speaks, right? Like, you made a ton of money, you did good things, and everyone's doing a great job, and like, but that, it doesn't make me feel anything. Do you know what I mean? Or it doesn't make me feel something that will propel my own life action. It might make me feel envy, or it might make me feel like, yay, he's cool. But when you get to share that kind of a story on a stage, that is when I think, oh, wait, should I try again? And that's where transformation happens. And that's why storytelling matters, because we really do want to watch people try more than we want to watch them win. And so as humans, what we need to do is be okay with people watching us try, which that's so connected to building a business, right? Like, it's embarrassing to start a business. It's embarrassing to break out of the matrix. It's embarrassing. But what we're seeing is that these companies that are doing really well online, it's because they're showing the behind the scenes of their company trying to be built, right? Like, I got this building, I got this package. What do you guys think about this new shirt I designed? The behind the scenes and the trying is now more effective, and a more effective form of storytelling than like, hey, everyone, we launched last week and we made $1 million. Do you want in? Well, I don't know. I don't know what the story is, right? So I don't feel a part of it. I don't feel connected. It isn't all of a sudden my story. And that switch is really how we kind of start to make that change. And I think that you nailed that. And what's amazing, Graham, what you mentioned that I just want to double down on is that it was the 10-minute one. And I think like we think everything has to take so much time. And it just doesn't, right? Like it just doesn't. We can say really powerful, concise, and compelling stories in 30 seconds, in 60 seconds, in 1 minute, in 3 minutes. Like you don't need to go write a novel. Like open up your Instagram and say, yesterday I tried this thing and it failed and I just wanted to let you know. Like open up your thing and say like, hey, I'm launching a business. I want to tell you the 3 things that went wrong in the last year. That will get more attention to your business than you saying, here are the 19 testimonials saying how great I am, right? Sometimes there's a time and a place for that. Testimonials really matter. You know what I mean? That's what referrals are. That's how my business has grown. But the behind the scenes of that, the real life of that, the human of that, that's the thing that people remember and what sticks. So you don't actually need a ton of words, a ton of time, and you don't need to overthink it. And those are the things that really trip us up, right? Especially as business owners. We're like, I need to write my business story. I'm like, you have ChatGPT. You don't need to write, like, put in some facts. Say, write my bio. It will give you a good one. We have to stop overthinking these things. But how you share about your work at a dinner party, right? Like one of the biggest contracts that I recently landed, I met her at my kid's birthday party. Right? Like it's those kinds of things, right? It's just like a casual encounter. It's just networking. It's who you are. It's how it works. So I think there's so many pieces to that, Graham, that you nailed that. Like it's the short one. It's the true one. It's the honest one that people are like, that's me.
That's so good. So if I'm giving a webinar or a presentation, how do we know what stories to tell? Like, how do I know?
Yeah.
I got a lot of stories and I'm sure we have to mine for stories as we start to do this work, but like, what is there any pattern to what makes a great like opening story to a webinar, a presentation, a keynote, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would probably work that in reverse. Like, what is one of their takeaways? What is a transformation promise that you have? What is a value throughout your webinar? And then let's think back on your life and try to identify that. I do something in my course called a story map, which I did a micro version of in Coeur d'Alene with you. And I do in my 90-minute workshops with teams. But we identify a couple moments from your life and then we ascribe value to them. And that is just like, and I only give you 3 minutes to do it. You're not allowed to overthink it. It's like, write down something that happened 5 years ago that was a big deal. You know, you're like, and you just do it, right? Like I've done it with thousands of people and shockingly, people can do this, right? I know this sounds overwhelming, but when you underthink it, there's a higher success rate. So I think thinking through like, what are some stories from my life that have in the past resonated with people? What are some stories from my life that have in the past at a dinner party really landed? What are some stories in my life that have been found meaningful in someone else's story? Then you can kind of think through those stories and then you can make them make sense. So I don't believe that you really have to have an opening story that is the exact perfect tie to your workshop. I do think you need to figure out how to reverse engineer it towards that. We have all noticed in the current political climate, but when politicians are asked a question, they will answer with whatever story they want. It has nothing to do with the question, right? They're like, this is a good opportunity for me to talk about this one thing. And so they say something like, great question. You know what that reminds me of? And then they say whatever they want, right? Whatever they want, because the story they're about to tell is way, way more transformative or affecting or flaring or fear-based or encouraging or hopeful than whatever question they were going to answer. And then, so I don't think you have to have a perfectly formulated story to the launch of a workshop. I do think you should think through, okay, here are 3 stories that have landed in the past, or here's the one story I'm a little worried about telling. That might be just a great place to start. Open with honesty, heart, connection, vulnerability, and say, and that's why we're here today. I've overcome a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of trials. And so I wanted to open up the space and a room and a community to figure it out together because I didn't want to do it alone anymore. And that's why we're here.
I love that. You're really funny. You have comedic timing. You have funny stories. Like, what if someone's like, I'm not funny.
Yeah.
I don't have a funny story. Nothing crazy. I didn't live in an RV.
Yeah,
I don't have these crazy stories. What do I do if I'm not a naturally funny person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have people who I know who do help people be funny. I don't encourage people to try too hard to be funny. I don't think it works very often. I like to use the word, instead of the word humor, I like to use the word levity. I think everyone is capable of great levity. I think humor does require certain personality types, interactions, EQ, testing, all of those kinds of things that some of us just have it more naturally. I mean, I was raised with a million boys and no one ever listened to me. So if I didn't say it quick and funny, no one ever heard what I said. You know what I mean? Like they just ran away. Like, and then they still made fun of me. It was never funny, right? Like the joke never landed, right? So I just kind of had to fight for my space my whole life. So I think that was, earned. But for some people, they're not necessarily going to have a lot of humor or punch or connection. But I think every workshop story, keynote, business pitch, it requires levity. People have to come up for air for a second. They have to say like, oh, okay, we're okay. You just told me about that thing that happened with your brother, but I got to come up for a second, and like get a little giggle and talk about how much I shop on Amazon, or just tell a funny truth or a random thing, and I, we all, boats, just dogs. I'm like, think about the most inconsequential levity moment. Like, here is a list of things that people don't have strong trigger warnings around, like let's go towards that thing and bring that in. So I like to differentiate that a little bit. I think everyone was required to give levity, but not everyone is good at being funny. And so I have people who say like, write jokes for my keynote. I do private keynote coaching. I help people write keynotes, and I think it doesn't necessarily work. I think, when you're like, when someone's looking, thinking, was that funny? I'm like, oh no, like it either was or wasn't. And I don't know the magic of humor. I have no idea how to break that down perfectly. I've only spent years working on storytelling, but I think that like that levity thing is important, where you can let people come up from air. You can have them take a deep breath. You can say something kind of silly, off-candid, or just totally not serious is helpful. Like you can just talk about something that isn't so weighty. And you incorporating that into your workshop, into your business pitch, into your meetings is really important. Just so people can go, whew, okay, you're not bringing me down with the ship.
No, that's so good. One last thing I was thinking of is, as we're thinking about storytelling, and I'm just thinking about content creators, like what would you say is the most useful exercise for them? Is it just to like, what is my core story? Like come up with that core story that has with a core value that ties into like the mission of what my brand's about? Or like if you had to start somewhere, would it be an origin story? Would it be like a story that explains why you do what you do? Like you even mentioned, like you help people tell, like when you're on an airplane, like what do you do? Like how do you explain what you do?
Yeah.
What would be a great first story to start working on?
I think origin story is probably ideal. I mean, you did this really well. Like I was going to be a rock star. What am I doing here? And that kind of flip of like, oh, wait, it makes me curious. How did he get where he did? I can be seen trying, I think that origin story probably is a good place to start. And people who have often started businesses have usually a decent origin story, even if it's like, my dad gave it to me. I'm like, okay, let's go deeper on that. Like, let's figure out a better story than that. Like, what did you think you were going to do? When did you think that wasn't the truth? Like, let's kind of probe there for a second so that we can get a more impactful story. So I think an origin story is a great place to start. Why do you do what you do, and why does it matter to me? And answer that narratively. So, it's not like I sell books. It matters because you should like my book. Like that doesn't work. But like having that connection point where they can really feel like, oh, I understand that. That makes sense to me. So I think origin story is a great place to start. But you can also just reverse engineer that. It's so important to remember, Graham, that every single human alive has incredible stories within them. Every single one of us. You do not need to have lived in an RV or jumped out of an airplane or, dealt with whatever you've dealt with and gone through whatever you've gone through and made rental properties or made millions of dollars in courses. Every single person has incredible stories. And I say this in the workshops, but the greatest storytellers are first interested. Then they are interesting. So when you can start to pay attention to the stories around you, you can start to realize like, oh, wait, the craziest stories in my whole life are from my grandma. Why am I even here? Because of my grandma. Like the most important stories are told around dinner tables. Like it's really this human thing, right? It's like what you overcame when you almost didn't graduate from high school, that time you broke your arm. Like 20% of the people in a room in a corporate space that I do storytelling work with, their story is in high school when they didn't make the team. That is a big deal to grownups to this day. You know what I mean? Like 45-year-old men are like, I almost became a baseball player, and I'm like, and I value that. Like, I'm like, this is good. You have to say it out loud, like, because that story resonates with a lot of people. Like, everyone has a thing that they've overcome to get where they are. And if you don't think that's true for you, I don't think you're telling the truth. Because even if your whole life was handed to you on a silver platter, sometimes that doesn't work. Right? Like, so it's every single one of us as a human is consistently overcoming, creating, and transforming. So You have a valuable story if you're listening to this. You have a very valuable story within your life that is meaningful and can help someone. So it might not help everyone, and we're not trying to do that, right? We're not trying to tell stories that like every single person who's ever lived really resonated with. That's someone else's job. Your job is to tell a story from your own life that resonates with someone. And I promise that that's possible.
Oh, so good. Okay, this is amazing. Before I get to my last question, I do want people to know you do have an incredible course, Story School, and they can get it at katiequesada.com.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys want to dive in deeper with Katie's stuff, like go take her course and like do this stuff that she's teaching in the workshop. It's so practical and so helpful. And I think it's going to help you with your webinars. I think it's going to help you with your YouTube content, Instagram, when people connect with you and you're trying to sell people even on your vision for what you do to hire you. Like if you can tell a better story in the concise manner, like this is a tool that will make you money and give you influence. So check out her course, Story School. Real quick, final question. It's the golden rule segment, and I'm going to fight the guy again who's doing the renovations upstairs. Let me finish my podcast.
Do it.
Okay, so this can go anywhere you want to go. Philosophical question.
Okay.
You've got young kids.
Mm-hmm.
You and your husband are trying to raise them, teach them, give them wisdom. You're trying to pour into them. Don't make the mistakes we made. Do this. Do all the stuff you're teaching them. Let's imagine they forget everything you and your husband taught them.
Okay.
Except for one piece of advice, something they actually would carry with them the rest of their life, somewhat like a golden rule. And it's putting you on the spot. But what would you want that to be or hope that would be?
Graham, just a quick question at the end there. That's like
no big deal. No big deal. I literally heard someone say, don't ever do this on a podcast. I'm like, I pretty much do that every time.
Good. Yes. That's so good. I think it was something that my parents did, and I didn't like it in real time. But I'm thankful now. But I think I would tell them, you already know. You already know. It's in you. You already know it. You can trust that still small voice, that intuition. You already know. You don't need to keep... There was like a couple really pivotal points in our life where when my husband and I were trying to decide to buy this house and it was COVID and everyone in the world was like, don't buy a house. You're going to have to pay over asking price. Who are you? You're the craziest person on earth. We had to put in an offer that was like, I live in Orange County, California, right? Like we had saved all the money from all the years, from all of the RVs, like all the things. And we were trying to finally buy a house. And I'm like calling my mom in tears, like we have to ask $3,000 more than our max budget. Because just to put us that tiny, and I was like, Mom, that was it. I had said it was this number and I have to go over the number. So I shouldn't do it, right? I shouldn't do it. Should I do it? I shouldn't do it because we shouldn't buy this house because this is insane. This is so much money. Who has this kind of money? This is insane. And my mom was really frustrating and was like, only you and Danny know. Only you and Danny know if this is right. And I was like, that was unhelpful. I found that unhelpful. And I really did think that. And I was mad and I hung up the phone mad. And I was like, she told me nothing. She told me we would know, and we had to make the decision. And thank God, you know what I mean? Like we have a 2.9% interest rate, like, only in retrospect.
Bingo.
Exactly. Only in retrospect can you realize like, oh, everyone saying that you're insane was wrong. Because no one knew, no one knew, no one knows, and no one still knows. But I think I would tell the children, like, you do know, like you can trust your voice and your heart. You don't need to go looking for it. That still small voice within you. You can trust it.
I love that so much. And I love the micro lesson there that nobody knows what the heck we're doing. Nobody knows the future or what you should do. So it's Rich Litvin always says, like, it's all made up.
It's all made
up. So just
all made up.
No pressure, bro. No pressure.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Thanks for hanging out with me and dealing with this junk at the end here with the renovations. It was
all good. Yeah.
You're a trooper.
It's real life.
This is amazing. Where can people find you online, hang out with you and connect with you more?
Yeah, so it's all my name. It's really clean, Katie Quesada. And Quesada is Quesada. And that's my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my website. And then the course is all there. Story School, the mega course, katiequesada.com. And that will take you through like story mapping, the 3 C's, identifying your core story, and then what platforms you should tell that story on and how and where, and some really cool technology to make it easier for you. So that's kind of the basics of the course, and you can dive in.
Amazing. Katie, thank you so much. You're a gem. Thanks for what you do. Keep doing it in the world. I hope our paths continue to cross.
Yes.
I'm learning a lot from your stuff, so thank you for pouring into me. And it's going to help a lot of people.
Yes, thanks, Graham. So glad to be here.